Hello friends, I'm Buddy here at House of Props, and this week's build is one of the underplayed shields from the Lord of the Rings. I'm talking about this shield used by Theoden during the Battle of Pelennor Fields. It's attached to the side of Snowmane, and we get a few shots of it during the famous "A sword day, a red day ere the sun rises" speech delivered by the late amazing Bernard Hill. Early this year, Weta Workshop unveiled their Theoden on Snowmane 1/6 scale figure, where the shield is displayed in all its regal glory. I haven't made a piece of Rohan as of now, so this felt the perfect detailed build to take on. Let me show you how, and let's get started. I started by cutting the shield base shape out of two pieces of 10mm foam, and then glued these two layers to each other with a generous layer of contact cement. I'm using two layers to create a sturdy base that's light and will hold its shape. If it was only one layer, there's a chance we would end up with that embarrassing foam wobble that happens, and we don't want that. Next, I cut part B out of some 2mm foam. I create some placement registration lines on the base so that as I glue part B, it won't stretch and warp on me. Since this piece is an odd, intricate shape, I'm going to attach it in sections. So first I apply a decent layer of contact cement to the base and back of a part of part B. Then, using a heat gun on low, I dry out the glue just enough to remove the wetness sheen before aligning the piece and firmly pressing it into place. Then I repeat the process and work my way around the shield bit by bit. Then, taking a 7-inch piece of 1/2-inch flat bar, I'm going to create the grip. To this bar, I attach two pieces of 10mm foam which I carved a channel into so that when the foam is attached, the pieces will touch and the steel is embedded in the foam. I'm using the flat bar because I've had it on hand, but you could swap it out for wood or flattened PVC. Then using my Dremel, I round over the corners and smooth off the sides so it looks like the foam is one piece. Then I wrap the grip with a strip of 2mm foam. This I secure into place with some CA glue, A because it'll dry faster, and B, it'll be easier to wrap the handle than if we were using contact cement. As I wrap, I slightly overlap the foam to create a nice looking edge detail, and as I work up the grip, I apply glue along the way in order to create a better bond. Once it's all wrapped and looking complete, I can attach it to the back of the shield where I've carved out two channels so the flat bar will sit flush with the surface, and simply glue it in place with contact cement. For this kind of project, this connection will be ample. As you can see, it's easily picked up and the grip doesn't budge. Next, I mark out the placement for part E and draw in some planking lines on the rear. Now, to create the illusion of individual planks, I'm using a knife edge on my wood burner, and with it nice and hot, I slice down the length of the planks. The knife will create a nice slice, and the heat will cause the foam to shrink slightly, which in turn causes the lines to open up. Plus, a combination of the knife and the heat create a subtle bevel on the top of the foam, adding to the illusion of individually cut pieces. While I continue creating plank lines, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button, if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow, and with your help I've reached the 5,000 marker, and let's see if we can make it to 6,000. Plus, if you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you never miss a build. Thank you! With the planks out of the way, I decided to carve some wood grain onto the rear by using my Dremel with a medium grit sanding drum. By angling the drum so just the tip edge catches the foam and keeping the marks sporadic and random, you can create some detailed wood grain pattern on your builds, and by varying the pressure you apply will create a nice natural unevenness in the lines, adding to the piece. At this point, I attached part E onto the spot on the rear. This piece will hide the channels created to accommodate the grip I made earlier. Then on the front, part F can be glued into place around the center opening. Here you want to take care that the center opening in both part F and the shield align evenly. To create the boss, I attached 4 pieces of part G to each other with contact cement to form the boss base shape. Then this is attached so it fits into the center hole. You have to squeeze the boss a little to make it fit into the opening, and you only want the edges on both the shield and the boss to touch. Then part H can be glued around the boss, and since it's such a small narrow piece, I'm just going to use some CA glue. Then part I can be attached to the top of the boss like so. You might be wondering why so many colors. This is something I do when I'm working on such an intricate and detailed build, so I can keep the mini layers straight without them visually blending together. Next, the large diamond pieces can be attached on the front so that they are in line with the vertical center line of the shield. Here I'm attaching the 2mm strip that makes up part K. This will create the banding around the outer edge of the shield. And using contact cement, I center the strip on the outer edge and work my way around the circumference of the shield first. Then I glue down the overhanging flaps. Once in place, 4 pieces of part L can be wrapped and glued over the 4 quadrants, 2 in line with the vertical center line and 2 with the horizontal center line. At this point, I attached part M to the top center of the boss and drew in all the details onto part B. Then I glue on the 4 pieces of part N. I changed my original part B shape to include some of the baby blue pieces you see on my shield. This way you will only need to attach 4 part Ns and not have to worry about overlap. To create the texturing in the pieces, I like to use a wood burner which has changeable tips. With the tip nice and hot, I draw on top of the design which I drew with a ballpoint pen. Now, whenever you work with a wood burner and foam, make sure you wear your PPE and work in a well-ventilated area and keep away from children and pets because the fumes are quite toxic. Now, with all the texture carved, I continue with building up the boss. To do that, I'm using some micro fuel line with an outer diameter of 3/16 of an inch to create a tubular shape around the base of the dome. This I'm gluing into place with CA glue, and I'm making sure to keep it tight as I work my way around, and by using a few drops of Zit Kicker once I have the piece where I want it, it'll cure the glue instantly, allowing me to move to the next spot. Next, part Q consists of 3 individual pieces of 4mm foam strips which have been slightly rounded over. The first attaches around the top small circle, and the second around the top larger circle. Then the third around the center of the remaining visible dome base. Now on the black circle, I'm going to add some foam clay because the original shield has some details which make it look almost like it was poured molten metal, so I'm using the clay to create an uneven texture, just by adding the clay and pulling it around the circle while simultaneously pressing it onto the boss. While the clay dries, I go ahead and attach the rivets onto the sun pattern's diamond shapes with just some CA glue. After the clay completely dried, I drew on the embossing designs on the boss and the surrounding rings. But before we add texture, I attach the 2 pieces of part S around the outer edges of part F and part H. Now, with those in place, we can add texture. For that, I'm using a 3D fabric paint tube with a small nozzle applicator tip. This paint will be applied to the boss and the surrounding circles, as well as the edging around part B. To apply, I simply squeeze the paint out to trace the lines. I'm starting with the highest point on the boss and will work my way down in order to avoid having to reach over freshly applied paint. Having the narrow nozzle allows for accurate application, and it also helps to push the paint around until you get the desired shape. Parts F and B get a mixture of line work like these squarish designs, fill work like with the wargs and the horse and riders on F, and the geometric designs on B. Once painted, this technique will make it look like the metal has been embossed from the rear. I also use the paint to apply dome rivets around the grip on part E, as well as around the perimeter of banding along the outer edge of the shield. At this point, the build is complete, the clay and the 3D paint are both dry, so we can begin to get ready for priming and painting. But before either, I want to heat seal the foam. This will make the foam shrink slightly, causing the pores in the foam to close up, which in turn will allow paint to adhere better. To heat seal, I waft my heat gun over the surface, and with darker colored foams, you can see a slight color shift to a darker hue when sealed. You don't want to be too hot or stay in one place for too long because it will damage all your hard work. Next, I use quick seal to fill in any gaps or pinholes. The latter often comes with EVA foam. And plus, I'm filling in this area I textured because I realized I drew it on the wrong side and it should actually be smooth here, and the texture is on the curved edge of this spot. Then to apply it, I use a palette knife like a spatula and smear the caulk over the areas. I also use it to fill in the seams on the boss. Once the caulk is dry, I lightly sand over it with some 400 grit sandpaper. This will remove any unwanted texture and unevenness in the caulk and smooth it up. Then the entire shield can be sprayed with some Plasti Dip, which works great for foam projects because it has flex to it and it provides a nice surface to apply paint to. To apply it, I spray 3 thin, even layers and let each layer sit for a half hour before applying the next. This way I can get even coverage and avoid drips and runs. Once the plasti has dried, I'm going to spray all the gold areas. I'm using a brushed gold acrylic and I thin it with some rubbing alcohol so I can use an airbrush. For this project, I'm using this battery-operated airbrush because it was cheap and it allows me to add a larger reservoir to the top. It's meant for cake decorating work, but it works really well for projects where there is a lot of area to cover. By using the rubbing alcohol as the thinning agent, not only is it cheaper, but it'll evaporate very quickly and you're less likely to get the paint pulling or running. In order to make the gold not look so monotone, I then airbrush on a thin layer of some antique gold as well. Next, some metallic silver is applied to the smaller diamond shapes, as well as the 2 larger diamonds. Then a mixture of Venetian red and burnt umber is applied to the inner shapes of part B, like so. And a forest green is applied to the visible areas of the original part A pieces. These colors are looking very concentrated right now, but we'll age them down in a little bit. Then I applied a Venetian red wash to the reddish areas and then pounced them with a crumpled up piece of paper towel. The pouncing will create some dimpling in the paint and this will look like leather texture. Now, to age down all this bright gold, I apply a layer of burnt umber which I thinned with a little bit of water. And this I pounce with paper towel, but with a flat area of the towel, not the crumpled up bit. This step really tones down the clean look of the gold and gives a surface more reminiscent of textures we see through Rohan in the films. This same brown wash I not only apply to the gold, but also to the green areas and a little bit to the red. Burnt umber is a great blending color when it comes to aging. In fact, it's what we scenic artists refer to as a love color because it blends and complements a very wide range of tones and other colors. Next, I apply a black wash to the engraved areas and blend it out so the majority of the paint remains in the grooves. I also apply it around all the edges between layers of foam and where I want there to appear to be edges, keeping the most pigment near the creases where weathering would naturally occur and blending out from there. It also works really well to tone down the brightness of the silver. Now on the rear, I based the wood with some raw sienna, and when that was dry, I brush on some thinned burnt umber. I try to keep my brush marks going the direction of the wood grain and apply the paint so it's not quite so even, but so there are some dark spots and some thinner spots. After that has dried, I apply a little bit of water around the outer edges near the banding, and then apply some thinned black to that wet area. Once I have a nice layer, I take the paper towel and wipe the paint down the length of the planks. This will push the paint into the wood grain texture and create some nice streaking down the planks, just adding to that wood grain. After all that has dried, I'm going to give the front of the shield a very light spray with some gloss clear coat. This will accentuate the colors we've applied, but it also will give the green and red areas a little shine, just like real stained leather would have. You don't want to spray too thick of a layer, or it will look more like a varnish and not as natural. And finally, Theoden's shield is finished. This piece has a ton of detail, but is actually really easy to assemble, texture, and paint. By keeping the pieces to a minimum, it allows for a build which looks more like the screen used prop. The paint and aging creates a distinction in layers, and the clear coat accentuates the layers of washes applied to the leather areas. The layers of scoring and 3D fabric paint create a surface which looks like metal which has been stamped and embossed, and on the rear, the shield is enhanced with a light oak color planking which complements the gold accents on the shield, perfect for the King of Rohan. Let me know what you think of this build. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. If you have any questions about any of the tools or techniques I've used, feel free to ask. I'm only too happy to answer them. If you'd like to make one of these shields for yourself, I've posted a link to the template below. Please give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.